Welcome back to Questing Beast. I'm Ben. Today we're going to be taking a look at this review copy that I was sent of Gathox Vertical Slum, which was written and illustrated by D.L. Johnson with chapter fiction by Josh Wagner. This is a print-on-demand version, which you can get from DriveThruRPG. As usual, I will put links down in the description below for where you can check it out for yourself. Before we begin, I want to do a shout out to my most recent Patreon supporter, which is David Sheardewin. Thanks so much, David. It means so much to me when people actually support me and help keep this channel running. So your support means a lot. Let's dig into what this book actually looks like on the inside. Here's our back, if you want to take a closer look at that. And the main idea here is that Gathox is a interdimensional god creature, also a kind of like a mountain, and it travels around the multiverse with a giant city on its back. And this is the story of the people who live in that city. It has these little bits of short fiction here and there that help set the tone. I think that's kind of neat. So here's sort of a faraway picture of Gathox there. It's like this big kind of triangular wedge of stone with a city growing up out of its back. There's a closer picture there. There's almost like a mouth in the front, whereas it crawls over the landscape. It devours things that are in its way to consume it for fuel and energy. And as it's traveled across the multiverse, different civilizations have encountered it and slowly built up this city. The city has people from all across the universe. It's a little bit like a Planescape in that sense, but it's not a city of doors. It's just a collection of different civilizations that are more or less stranded. Because once they settle on this thing, inevitably it'll shift to another universe and they will be lost. And they'll have to wait maybe hundreds or thousands of years for it to make the rounds back to their home world again. It travels around because the bottom of it is covered with tons of human legs, which is a wonderfully creepy idea. It's very Kingdom Death. And this whole book is just a setting guide, basically, for running things within Gathox. And it does a really great job at that. It's all written and illustrated by the same person, so you know that the vision that he has is really coming across well. We have a number of weird types of creatures: the bloody people, the glatu, the gong-warped fishermen, and so on. There's definitely a high weird sense going on here. It's not trying to be really realistic. It's playing up the sci-fi elements because there's a lot of different types of technology that are mixed together. It's very pulpy in that sense, which I really enjoy. It's gonzo in the OSR sense. We have a good section on the general background of the city, how everything works from a high level, and then it gets down into more details as we go along. We got a great map of the city, lots of detail here, enough information that you could get a very clear sense of what things are going to look like geographically as players move around through the three main sections here. The Kettle, and then the Burchan favela, and then the Craw, where all the fancy people live, up near the top of the city. There's lots of weird little elements to this setting that are wonderfully surprising. Things are kept very terse. It's very well written, where every little bit of information, so important locations, is no more than a paragraph long, and it gives you just enough stuff that you can cleanly visualize it in your head and have a couple little adventure hooks so that if players go there, you have stuff that you can give them right away. It's very succinct. I love that about it. It doesn't give you more than you actually need. So everything has great names, like the vast flea market is called the Dregs. You have Li Zhao's dollhouse, the Temple of Toil. There's lots of different religious cults going on in here. The whole stats and so on are designed for, it's white box, which means that it is designed for a cleaned up, modernized form of original D&D. So extremely simple and straightforward. Easily adaptable to anything D&D related because it uses the 6 basic stats, it has hit dice, and so on. But everything is very simplified. So hit dice are all D6s, weapon damage is pretty much all D6s, except maybe a +1 or a -1, and so on. It's really about how you engage with the world rather than how statted up your character is. We got a bunch of different NPCs. And again, short, terse descriptions. By reading them, you get a very clear sense of what they're like. And each one starts out with cues for how to actually play them and what they look like. It's great that it starts off with that, because that's what the game master would need if they were running this. A lot of close attention paid to what a game master would need. Each different of the 3 neighborhoods gets its own section of the book with a good dozen important locations there, along with who rules there, what is the political situation like, and there's always some sort of fun twist to make that area of the city interesting. For example, the favela is run by, the Elven Kings, which come from all walks of humanity, united in their obsessive worship of what they call Fey literature. They grow their hair long and starve themselves in an attempt to appear more elf-like, often going so far as to adorn themselves with striated gold leaf jewelry and custom body modifications like prosthetic ears. So they're just like elf cosplayers, basically. But they're also a mafia that run this whole section of the city. Love stuff like that. It's both funny and it tells you a lot about the culture of the city at the same time. There's enough information here that players could simply wander into a part of the city and you could just grab a random location as they walk around and just use that as an adventure hook. And you could play things right off of that. We have the last section here, the Craw, which is the rich, fancy part of town. Again, about 12, 13 locations here, along with the factions that rule it and important NPCs there. So you have a wide selection of NPCs to choose from. You can figure out what their names are like very easily and how the factions feel about one another. All of the NPCs come with illustrated portraits, so the whole world is just there. It's plopped right in front of you in a very easy to use fashion. Cosmology, gods, and antibodies. So the way that cosmology here works is very strange. The whole city is on the back of a giant traveling god thing that travels between dimensions. And the reason why it permits a city to be grown on its back is it needs to feed off of the psychic energy of that civilization. So it's a symbiotic relationship. And so in order to stimulate this psychic energy, the gods, or the god, Gathox itself, that's its actual name, will send little psychic probes and antibodies is what they're called, throughout the population and manifest themselves as different deities to inspire cults, to inspire worship, and just more psychic energy for it to feed off of. So ultimately, all of this is caused by Gathox himself, although the people living in the city are not aware of that. So some of the manifestations of Gathox could be the god that grows and grows, or the goddess who balances on narrow precipices, right? And there are cultures and religions based around each of these aspects. We're looking at some characters and house rules next. So how you do ability checks, it has its own little system. It's basically roll under, but you can just add more d6s for how difficult it is. So a very difficult task is 5 d6s trying to roll under one of your scores. So obviously it's very difficult. And then really easy would be 1 d6. So that creates a very simple, quick little dice pool system. And I like simple, small dice pool systems because it's concrete. You're holding the dice in your hand. There's a clear sense in a tactile way of how well you are or how difficult something is. Because if it's a lot of dice, then I'm more likely to fail. So you can just kind of feel that. And it's easy for DMs to modify because you can just add dice or remove dice. There's a number of little classes here. So you basically have your militants is one of the main categories with some categories underneath it. The street tough, the soldier, the martial master. And each of these has, a minor little ability that sets them apart. Because this being based on White Box, it's really not about detailed character builds at all. It just gives you enough flavor to make you feel distinct. And that's all that you really need. Same thing for spiritualists or mentalists, which are divided into spiritualists, faith healers, cosmic doctors. And then you have mutants, which have a wide variety of psychic powers because the psychic maelstrom generated by this god that they are riding causes a lot of mutations in the population. Beneficial mutations, we have negative mutations. Mutation tables are just really great in general for really any game that's D&D like, because you're going to get cursed, you're going to fall into a pool of goo, and you're going to need mutations at some point. So it's always great to have more. There's a simple skill system called wheelhouses, where instead of having specific skills, it's a lot more freeform and more general. So things like wildlife, surface environments, the underworld, business acumen, and so on. And that just gives you a little bonus to something that's related to your wheelhouse. In a lot of ways, I like the sort of general freeform skill systems a lot better than the really specific ones, because they allow you to customize your character to fit much more cleanly with your concept. And they don't bog you down, and they're more realistic because they're general enough that the DM can get a sense of how much would you know about this, rather than having these really tightly defined skills where you feel really, wedged in. How to deal with character death. It's possible to get reincarnated if your group really wants to go through the trouble of doing that. You got your equipment lists, pretty standard stuff. As I said, damage is pretty much all D6s with slight modifications. But it goes up through things like laser pistols, laser rifles. You can get revolvers, katanas. It has that gonzo feel. Building an empire and running the game is Chapter 5. So this is very much a faction-based game. It's a small little city, and it assumes that players are going to want to build a reputation. Because it's not a huge city, people are going to know who you are, especially as you start doing more and more dangerous missions. You're going to gain a reputation. You're going to be able to start increasing your territory and your control over the city. So if your players love that sort of aspect of a role-playing game, this is really great. There's a lot of good tools in here. So for example, here's how you get reputation points based on the types of deeds that you do. And there's a system for bidding for territory. Most gangs don't want to actually get into an all-out turf war. That's just bad for business. But you can bet your reputation to try and take over different sections of the city. So if you own like a large business, for example, you'd be bidding reputation, and then there's like a 50% chance that another gang will try and counterbid you. And then there's how much it costs and yield, so it'll start producing more money for you. And it'll give you mooks and a lieutenant and a brainiac. So you slowly build up your little mook army. Rules for seizing territory, losing property, mutinies within your faction. You can roll up different types of gangs on some tables right here. There are gang motivations, distinguishing characteristics, like all trust has broken down, leading to factionalism. Or the boss has a twin lieutenant, 50% chance their aims are at odds. So you can throw little, tweaks into these different factions to make them more interesting and to separate them. And what I really love, this is something that a lot of games just don't have at all. This is just a section on running the game. This is just the author of the book talking to you about how he runs this book session by session. This is so great because it's not like a fantastic piece of writing. That's not my point here. The point is that he's giving you his viewpoint of how this book could be used. So everything isn't abstract and isn't just, how would I put all these different toolkits together? Where would I start? What does a session actually feel like in a place like this with tools like this? He just walks you through it. And by the end of it, you can envision yourself running this setting because the author of the game has walked you through how he would do it. It's strange to me that more books don't have a section like this, but it was really great to see that. We have a bestiary in here as well, along with lots of weird alien races. Here's some of your main sentient factions, along with some indigenous species, like a crocodactyl, a filth elemental, a flat earther, which looks like some sort of beholder. The art does a great job really evoking the setting and just how weird and unexpected the whole place is. It's a great setting for if you want players that want a lot of variety, because it's not very tonally consistent, and you can tell that's not the intention. Or at least the tone is gonzo. It's variety, it's surprise, it's wonder. And we have some of the weird, not demons, but manifestations of Gathox, the way that it appears to people once they start venturing down beneath the lower crust of the city into the beast itself. It doesn't really like you going down there. It comes with an actual adventure, and this adventure is very classically OSR in the sense that it does not tell you how to go through the actual adventure. It's very non-railroaded. You're simply given a situation with a lot of entangled elements, a lot of conflicts, and then some possible rewards. If you do such and such, you're going to get a reward and some gold and maybe some reputation points. You got some rumors to start you off, and then players are simply free to go about this any way that they like. It encourages players to get creative and to be opportunistic and clever and pursue the sorts of adventures that they would enjoy. So rather than saying to beat the adventure, players are going to have to act like this, players can simply act how they would like to act, how they would want to deal with the setting itself. It comes with a little dungeon, which is like a vertical dungeon. So it's a tower that you can explore with a good deal of encounters and weird stuff and people to talk to. It has, and a section at the very end, a complete appendix of all of the tables throughout the book put into one place for easy reference. And I really like that. I love it when books aren't afraid to, quote unquote, waste paper to reprint everything, but to make it easier to reference. So that's putting the ease of reference priority ahead of, page count and keeping the pages down. And a section of inspirational material at the back. There we go. Gathox Vertical Slum. It's a really fun setting. And I was not super excited at the beginning just because it looks fairly plain. It's just, on white paper and it has a fairly straightforward layout. But the number of good ideas and the focus on ease of use for game masters and the variety of ideas and adventure hooks and weird monsters and specific stuff that you can use designed for game masters to pull out at a moment's notice really impressed me. It looks like a lot of fun. And you can tell that this book has been played a lot, that the author has built all of these hooks up through tons of experience running this at conventions and running it for his home group. You can see that experience in there and that attention to detail and that deep knowledge of the setting. In other words, I really enjoy this book. If you want a cool fantasy sci-fi setting, it's hard to go wrong with this. I mean, the other example is Vorenheim, for example, which I've reviewed previously. But that's more like a toolkit for running anything, whereas this is much more specific. It's designed to run one particular place that one guy dreamed up. And it looks like a lot of fun. One great thing is that because it's a dimension-hopping being or dimension-hopping city, you can easily plop it into really any fantasy campaign. That would be a great world shakeup. If right in the middle of your campaign, Gathox suddenly phases into your home universe and it starts crawling across the landscape. That would be a lot of fun. Anyway, that's it for my review for today. Hope you enjoyed it. Join me next time when I will be looking at Tomb of the Serpent Kings by Scribbles from Coins and Scrolls. This is one of my favorite starter dungeons. I have run it a whole bunch of times. So I'm really anxious to show you it and show you some of the improvements that Scribbles has made in the layout and making this one of the most easy to use dungeons out there. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.